Judy Kern, Louisville Council. I'm actually the alternate, so I'm mostly going to be listening with Debbie on primary tonight.
Emma Fox, Louisville staff.
Deborah Craigie, City Council, and I'm the primary for that group.
Louisville is well represented.
Mayor Pro Tem Longmont, Sean McCoy.
Jen Keller, Superior Council.
Carol Levy, Boulder County Commissioner.
Nick Robles, staff of Boulder County.
And then on the screen, we have Diane, I can't roll, Langley.
The city of Louisville. Hello.
Thank you, Scott.
Hi, good evening. Scott Furley. I am chair of the local improvement district for Niwot.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. And I don't see Taisha anymore. Oh,
I'm still here, Claire.
okay, you weren't showing up. Yeah, go ahead.
No problem. Hi, Taisha Adams, Boulder City Council. Sorry, I
Great.
can't be there in person today.
Yeah, well, hopefully you'll get a lot out of the conversation nonetheless.
Excuse me. Sorry, we have Anil and Ken as well.
Why am I not seeing?
Yeah, unfortunately,
them listed?
this is the view of the room,
Yeah, I'm looking at the top. Okay, well.
and I can't control that.
Call it,
unfortunately.
folks.
Okay, so maybe Anil.
Anil.
Hi, sorry, this is Anil, council member from town of Erie.
Thank you. And Ken? I did see Ken.
Ken, can you hear us?
Well, we have Ken Winarsick from Jamestown, who I did see. Anyone else? Who am I missing?
So Chris.
Oh, Miss Meschek? Chris
Yes.
Meschek, are you still there?
I am. Hi, everyone. Chris Meschek with the City of Boulder, and I'm in transit, but we'll join you in about 15 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I just signed in online so I can see the screen better. And Paloma?
Hey everyone, Paloma Delgadillo representing Broomfield City Council.
Great, welcome. All right, I think I've got everyone and I think I'm now set up so I can see everybody that's with us online. And so, well, there was lots and lots of interest in having Mike come and talk to us about our Office of Disaster Management and everything that his office does. And Mike has brought lots of goodies and does a great presentation. And you know, if you've never seen Mike present, you're gonna want him to come and present to all your community groups because he really does a wonderful job. So I'm just gonna turn it over to you for this. And we have, I guess we're thinking, what is it about? Well, we have about 50 minutes set aside, so plenty of time for questions, discussion. Yeah.
That's great. Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Mike Chart, Director with the Office of Disaster Management. Feel free to, if you have a question, just jump in. Don't wait to the end. Do well with all that. Nick, you gonna work the slides for me by chance or not? Do I have to go completely just winging it, which I can do too. That's the case. What we have for you tonight, though, was just a series of topics and kind of a whatever really is topical for you. First one, of course, wildfire. It's a big issue. We can talk about the weather and the drought and many of the events that have been occurring, kind of highlight that. Also, want to be able to talk about this thing called wildfire initiated community conflagration. It's something that our office has taken a lead on with other emergency managers in the metro area, specifically Douglas, Jeffco, and Arapahoe. And we've been working on this since last year, about November. And there's still ongoing work, and some of the things that have come out of it have been actually deployed and used, and some of the fires that have happened on the front range here. So a little bit on that, and then like to get into also talking about PSPS, if anyone's interested about the public safety power shutdowns. If you have any questions there, we can answer that. We've been very active working with Excel and doing a lot of testimony with PUC and legislative hearings in the last 6 months related to many of the PSPS events we've had. And then Sundance Film Festival planning, Chris Meschuk will be here. He can handle some of the higher level stuff, more what the event's gonna be like. I've been involved in a lot of the operational emergency planning, and then we can close up with just the bags in front of you, some community preparedness work that we have going on in the community, and elevate that, and any questions you have or any other topics. So is there anything that you want me to cover outside of that, those agenda items that I can pivot on and address? Is there anything at all?
A nuclear attack?
I actually get those questions, to be quite honest. I know you are, but,
Taco.
things become topical for people that I get the phone calls, and I've actually had 4 or 5 of those in the last couple of years, so,
I have a question on.
yes.
Flights from the airports going over residential areas.
Okay.
Is there any planning by the emergency group?
We don't have anything on that, but we put a pin on that at the end, and I can see what you have, and maybe there's a nexus there or not, but we definitely want to hear what you're feeling and seeing, and if there is something we do to help out,
That's my
obviously.
concern about if there's a crash because they're going
Yeah.
over homes.
Yep, absolutely. We can talk about those sort of, undesirable scenarios, but, those are the realities of risks that you have in living around airports, so we can definitely hit on that. Okay. All right, let's start off with wildfire. So, we are in a drought that hasn't been seen since the recorded time of the state recording it, not of all recorded time. So 1976 is when they actually started really measuring this sort of drought stuff. We are in D3 in the National Drought Monitor, so we just moved up, which is severe drought. And it's looking that through the summer, we'll be in this profile with an El Nino event that you've heard some stuff on the news, the Super El Nino, the Godzilla El Nino, whatever they're calling it. Greg Havener just gave us from the National Weather Service a brief out on that today, and it's a 50-50 proposition. It could be a really wet wet fall, maybe winter, and we kind of reverse our fortunes on the drought. Or it could be something where it stays south and we could find ourselves going into our next winter cycle with, drought conditions. And then we get back into our high wind profile. So the events we're having right now with the drought is definitely a feature to some of the things we're talking about with this wildfire urban conflagration piece. The next piece is the wind, and the wind events for us here on the Front Range, especially in Boulder County, the Bora winds, which are sort of forced pressure winds over the mountains, and then they go out on the plains further versus the Chinooks that have a tendency to have a mountain rotor with them, and the things we saw with Marshall or some of the other big wind events in our history. So when you get the drought, you have the fuels that are available, and then you get the winds, it puts us in a very high risk profile for wildfires to occur. The way that works, just a little bit about the response system. Since Marshall, there's been major improvements within just the way that we view the environment we're in. So today was example, a high fire indice day. Our fire management team from the sheriff's department evaluates the daily indices. They look at burn index and receptive fuels and moisture levels. All those things come into play, and then they evaluate whether we're low, medium, or high, and they put us in a different status, and they call dispatch, and that automatically changes the way that we tone out the fires. So at a high indice day, we get a very heavy response, a lot of resources coming in, things start shifting, there's maybe some pre-positioning, so we're tilting the response to be ahead of the game as much as possible. So we have that going on. We've done a lot with the alert warning systems, and there's been a lot of work in evacuation planning that continues to stay continually ongoing within the community. So those things are well practiced, and the system has been pretty well built out. So we've been using those things on most of these fires that we've had. With the 3 that we've just recently had west of Boulder, these are just some indicators that we're still in a very dry condition. We had fires in the region over the last 60 days or so, one in Thornton that you saw that was kind of speaking to this wildfire initiated conflagration piece out in Elbert County. The fire was running and they made a stand on a county road and were able to stop it. Otherwise, lineman was probably going to be engaged. So these, and then you've had Douglas have had a few fires. There's been about 7 or 8 fires on the Front Range. And that kind of segues into where we are on this work, is that we look at the fires that we have on the Front Range. they're different than sort of the things that happen above 7,000, 8,000 feet, because you have timber. Doesn't mean that they're easier up there, they're just a different type of risk profile and a different way that they burn. So the conditions we have down here, though, is it's that wind that's 35, 40 mile an hour or more sustained with gusts going to 60 to 70. These are gonna be fires that move fast. They're gonna start it in the open space areas, and then they're gonna move into the built environment, and then based around the density that they encounter and the receptive fuels that they encounter, that carries it into the built environment. And then you start seeing then the home to home transmission or movement of fire, which is what a conflagration is. A conflagration is a term for an uncontrolled urban fire where you now exchange the trees or the buildings as the source of fuel. And within that urban environment, it has complexities that you necessarily don't see in some of the more rural or intermixed terrain, we call it, where it's distances between houses. You have hundreds of feet, perhaps. You're doing spot protection. You're pushing the fire around the house, protecting the house, even if the house is well protected with the home hardening and defensible space, it can survive. But in the dense urban environment where you have homes that are 30 feet or less apart with frame construction, the radiant heat and those things, now the home hardening is less effective. It's really ember resistant is what home hardening does for us, but we get the home to home, building to building. Now it's about urbanized firefighting. And this is now about water supply and getting the big trucks in there and making the stands and holding the fire. So with that said, these fires have a tendency to require a lot of resources, and we looked at the Marshall Fire, the AR, the after action report side of things. We had 75 fire departments on there from across the Front Range, hundreds of cops that were coming to our aid all within a quick surge period of time. And there wasn't any sort of common doctrine or operating guideline around that. So we need to be, as a region, better prepared to support one another because of the risk profile. So we brought in experts that actually know the grasslands, looked at the demography of the urban cities, and from Larimer to El Paso County, there is a high risk. The adjusted higher risk is Golden to Lyons. So we're once again in Boulder County and in a very higher to high risk, but the whole Front Range has it. We looked at things over the last 20, 30 years and the growth in the Front Range, and you looked at then where we had open spaces and you overlaid them where you had these colors that were showing natural lands, and then you put in the density, and it's just, we're infilling all these areas that were ag lands or ranch lands. So they were getting grazed, they were getting, irrigated or disked. Now you have a lot where these are converting over to communities, then they want open space, they want the amenities of that. The open space now starts growing the grass, we build the communities right up into them. And now we have our urban conflagration problem like we saw at Marshall, where you have a very, very short window where it's a wildfire, but then it's into the built environment. And these are the challenges that we're facing, and we're coming up with a plan for how to handle that. So we did this WIC program, Wildfire Initiated Community Conflagration, used some grant money from the North Central region in the UASC, which is the Urban Area Security Initiative. Denver runs that. So we're part of that. And we were able to put about $100,000 into this program. We held 5 workshops. We have over 5,000 hours of staff time from across the Front Range. Had, public works people, fire, police, dispatchers, emergency managers. We've got over 400 people that are on our distribution list, and each one of the workshops is targeted towards a certain need or risk in people. We'd have 150, 170 people show up for these 8-hour workshops. So some pretty extraordinary work. We created facilitation plans, brought in SSMEs around it, really designed to bring the experts in to say, here's the problem, now go to work on it. And they're continuing their work right now. So the areas that we had first was understanding the problem, which is looking at the weather, how we build, where we build, the grasslands nature, alert warning, evacuation, effective fire control, and then command and control. How do we manage this large response that comes in? And those have all yielded sub-working groups that are still working. And this week, 2 of them have met. And what they're doing is working on the very things that we found were gaps in the workshops. So one of them was alert and warning terminology that's common across the Front Range. So we had 13 counties represented. We have about 9 that are working towards getting to warning and order like we use here in Boulder County. Law enforcement is coming up with a model response guideline for all law enforcement. So that if you're bringing in deputies or law enforcement folks from another county or city and they're flying in to do evacuations, it's already understood kind of what you need to do, how you need to do it, looking at prioritizing in an urban environment, the traffic management, more than you do traffic up in the hills. It's a shift of how you go door to door up there first, but down here it's more about 10, 20,000 people are getting an alert around the roads, and you got to get the roads moving, and then you do the door to doors and getting that whole sort of swarm environment handled. The fires, looking at what is the effective firefighting and how do we declare shifting from fire control to life safety. And what that means is fire hoses don't work very well. Even the big master streams get about 50 miles an hour. It comes out of the nozzle and bends and it never hits the target. So effective fire control becomes difficult. And then looking at communities and how we build and what's the effective fire suppression control that all the engines you can get from your fire department on the initial alarm, what's the max control area? How many homes can they handle on fire simultaneously? And then what's the next wave? Mutual aid in the county, what's the max suppression control? Then what's the next max suppression control coming from the region? And building the systems around that and using that sort of as anchor points to say then, well, we can't have a fire go beyond this effective fire control or it's burning into the community uncontrolled. So looking at that as some sort of metrics of success and then saying, how do we manage this? So it's the grasslands, the fuels, how we design communities, looking at that. Some of these things we can't change because we're already designed, so we have to look where we can. And these are the sort of trade-offs with risk management. Yes, sir.
Looking at the LA fires.
Yeah.
They had people that didn't quite grasp the evacuation concepts. And in fact, to the point where they were trying to spray out their homes with hoses and then they were finding that they had, the pressure had gone so quickly.
Yep.
Are we concerned with that, with that happening here where, you know, you hook up to the hydrant and pressure's just not there?
Yeah, and the reason why it's not there is because the homes are down. So every home has a service line that comes off the water main. And that's about a 1/4 inch, maybe a 1/2 inch, depending on it. And each one of those then isn't turned off anywhere. So the home burns down and collapses. That's a free flowing spigot. So think of it as multiple one of those hits. Then the question is, what is the water supply system? How many of those can they take before it drops the critical fire flow?
And with like apartments, you guys, the fire department has to come in and turn it off. With one of the things that we're looking at for like townhomes that are for sale, but still connected, that something in the closet would be where the resident themselves could turn off the fire abatement system. That's something that we're looking at right now.
Yeah, it's making sure though that if it's in the closet though, and then it breaks, the break's gonna, you know, with the foundation line, it's gonna probably there. So that's a great idea. These are the things we gotta look at. Like, how do you stop? It's like bleeding. How do you get a tourniquet on your water distribution system? Because that's really the lifeblood of fire suppression control. Once the fire's in the built environment, you have to be able to get the fire flow going. And if you don't have that, then everyone has to move to how do we then evacuate and get people out? Because we're gonna lose parts of the community because we just have no water supply. So there's no effective fire control. So that's what they were experiencing in LA, was that the scale of homes that were down was just crippling their water distribution system. Interestingly enough, I saw a film about this from the Bel Air fire from 1963, and they actually were showing this happening there. So somewhere we've lost that understanding. And then it's like, why do we have no water? But people in the LA fire were taking Home Depot 5-gallon buckets because the water was running down the gutter and scooping it up and going and putting fires out with it. So these are things that are just part of these urban environments that people have kind of lost this conflagration management and tactical strategy within our services. So that's one of the things we looked at, is we got to start training our fire departments and look at the way we're designing communities and all these things around these things with them in mind.
And the hydrants with the blue tops are potable water, and the ones with white.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So, question.
So the system that comes to the homes,
Mhm.
is there has, or maybe there has been, and the infrastructure that's already there, it couldn't be possible, but for new builds, is there possible to be like redundancy cutoffs for
These
them?
would be the things to think about, right? Like as we look at new builds or redevelopments where how do you build the grid system to be more resilient? So is it things you can do to prevent it from leaking? Are there things you can do that can make it easier to sectionalize? So that if we start to lose neighborhoods, you could say 2 blocks, we're gonna have to, we call it expected loss because none of it's acceptable. But it's like we lost the water supply, it's expected loss now. We got to get the water department in there, gate it off. Is it remote or is it turning the wheels? And most systems in the Front Range we find, they're not designed for that. And most water distribution systems are set up to handle 1 or 2 homes on fire or a large commercial property. It's not designed to have 50 homes going at the same time. And then everyone's tying into it. So these are these design pieces around this urban configuration problem, which is really across the West. So we're one of the groups that's looking at this, and we've got a gentleman, Gary Brees, who used to be an International Association of Fire Chief leader, and he's been hitting national exposure for this, and says we're doing things that no one else in the country is looking at right now within our planning. So, yeah. Question?
I just wanted to, so we've had 2 people join us. If you want to just say who you are, I mean, we know who you are, but just for everybody that's online.
I'm Jonathan Cam, the town manager in Newland. And I'm Chris Meschuk with the city of Boulder.
Yeah.
In person.
Jonathan, you were here this morning, weren't you?
Yes, I was.
This was your
Yeah.
second time here, yeah.
So to sum this up really, to just bring it to land on it, the strategies around this are 1, landscape management, fuels management, and grasslands are different than timber, right? And then looking at what's ever casting into the community. And then having good alert warning evacuation protocol, good effective fire response, and a good water distribution system. And the last one is preparedness. That's the other thing is people need to know what to do when they got to move. And the thing about, we got to view this as a grassland. So this is sort of 6,500 feet out to the county border. And everywhere you've got open space, it changes. So for like Longmont, changing environment, I live west side Longmont, that used to all be farmland out there. And now it's high density, built in, open spaces, natural lands flowing in there. Thornton said, I'm doing their AAR on the Thornton fire that just happened recently. And you heard the fire chief say, oh, we took lessons from Marshall and they mowed that open space the day before they had their fire. And had they not mowed it, it would have probably been into the buildings. So this kind of just shows how some of these things can do. So evaluating that, what's the land management practices that can work and looking at it more holistically. And I've done some comp plan work just saying, hey, can we look at the way we're designing? It doesn't mean that we can't have the high density, but maybe it's where we have it and then how we build around it. And some of those things are critical too. We've worked with the school districts and, they've done a whole evaluation of making sure the schools are more defended place, meaning that you may not be able to get 600 kids out. They may have to ride out the fire. And if they're in a good fire resistant building and they got good windows and they got HVAC, they may not be able to get buses in there. So these models we're working on is if you can get buses, get them out. But if you find yourself when the alerts go out, the roads are crammed, as we see in all these urban configurations, they just get jammed up because people are trying to get in, people are trying to get out. The best way to do it sometimes is maybe right out. So hospitals, long-term care centers, these are places that we just don't have the resources to move them all out, especially in high winds where the fire may be moving fast within the community. And the other side of this is the thing does change. Once the fire gets in the community, it's not like timber and wind, it will start slowing, is what the studies and the data is showing. So where do you may miss it here, but where do you pick it up and then make a stand and move it in the community? So these are things we're working on. Yes. Anyone?
So I was you were doing, an after, you said you're gonna be doing the after action
Yeah.
report for Thornton.
Yep.
Will that be, so it should be publicly available, it won't just be going to the city of Thornton?
I don't know. I'm just helping facilitate it so they can all be in it.
The
So
reason I'm saying that is, should you find that mowing was like a real, like a major factor in that fire being able to get under control, I think that is a critical piece for all of our communities. one for our residents and two for our staff.
Mhm.
As a cautionary tale, like here it was, this was tested and it worked. And this is why we absolutely have to continue to follow a lot of these recommendations.
Yep.
So that would be, I think that would be useful, at least for our community, but I mean, given, we saw what happens, one fire goes for one neighborhood and then next town, it doesn't really matter.
Yep.
So that's why I'm like, let's help all of us, let's help our Arvada do better, and so.
Yeah, I think it's the balance too, that we're working with city open space mountain parks too, what's the distances and the trade-offs? If you did 50 feet, what does that do? If you do 100 feet? The recommended distance we got from the state, Forest Service, the grasslands, Chad, Julie, was like 300 feet. And that's, yeah, you say it, and everyone's like, well, you gotta be kidding me. So, but he's like, well, that's, if you want a fire reduction zone or fire break, that's what it's gonna take in these fuel types with these winds. So that then becomes the community conversation, right? Like what risk do you live with? And then, what are the impacts? So that's follow the science, make sure we're looking at the impact so you can make an informed policy decision around.
Let's just think of all these people that xeriscape their lawns and put gorilla hair out there.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's great for reduction of how much water you put on in the space there, but it's terrible for exactly this reason.
Yep. So it's a lot of work going on in the space. That's the big thing.
Questions?
Yes, ma'am.
One on the evacuation.
Yeah.
We've experienced this in Louisville.
Mm-hmm.
We've been talking about letting the residents know that in an evacuation situation, you don't have to go the right direction on the road. If you're supposed to be evacuating to the east, for example, both lanes of traffic can go to the east. And you can drive on a trail, or you could drive over a park, or however you need to get out. You don't have to drive in the right lane of traffic.
There's a caveat to that, which is, if it's an orderly evacuation and you have time, we want people to try to follow rules of the road or the orderly flow, because if you get everyone going outbound, we call it contraflow, like you see in hurricanes, that's all well planned, but there's fire trucks, there's law enforcement trying to get in there to be able to take care of the situation. And the minute that gets clogged up, they're stuck. And why minutes go by, homes are burning, people are in dire situations. The way we teach that though is, if you're finding yourself now in a situation where it's static and you're not moving and the fire is approaching you and you've got embers and you're getting that spidey sense like, oh my gosh, this is going to be bad. That is when you need to be self-authorized, because you're in a very dire situation. This means if you have to drive through a fence through someone's yard to get onto a road and get away, even just getting 2 blocks away may make a difference. We also teach people you may have to abandon your car. So now you need to be on foot. And then how do you do you break into a house to ride it out, or do you find some place to go? These are things that are bad choices because you're in a bad situation, but they're the best choice you have at the time. So that's when we do that preparedness, that's how we couch that, or that caveat is, when you feel your life is in danger, you have to make decisions that are going to preserve your life. And you shouldn't be worried about rules of the road or not being on a bike path or those sort of things, because your life is in danger. So take the actions to save your life. Yeah. All right, kind of move through this a bit. That's evacuation, fire response, keep flying through. Kind of already moved ahead and talked fast. Sorry, I didn't give you the. Yeah, this is some interesting stuff. So this is what we're talking about. Just any community has this. So the idea behind this is, you look at the red, we look at communities from density. So even in LA, the study that came out from the Insurance Business and Housing Association was showing that homes that were more than 30 feet apart had a greater chance of survivability or less damage. And they were at like a directional 45-degree angle, and downwind were the ones that took the beating. But the homes that had distancing as 30 or greater were survivable on their own. So that was an interesting piece. So the density of the homes really matters. Structural separation, distance, I cannot stress enough when we get into urban configuration. Once it's in the built environment, that's when we have problems. Now it's about, we have to do fire control, water supply, evacuations. That's where we're living. So the chance of saving every home is no longer there. It's now, what can we stop the fire? Where can we stop the fire? And what's the expected loss from this happening? you can see there's some strategies like colors of which we had the fire reduction zones and these are the things that are the balance around community design that come up. Yes.
Do people at the state level making housing policy get this information?
Yeah.
No. So this is where we're at. So, yeah, so this is really we're kind of bottom up right now with this WIC group. So like I said, we came together. We had no idea this was gonna blow up like it did. We're like, yeah, we'll get together and see if it sticks. The next thing we know, everyone's like showing up. We're like, oh my gosh, now, I got another job to do. So, this thing is massive but it's percolating up and, we're starting to get like to the point where it's like, let's get some papers written on it. Let's move this into, different spaces and I think the bottom up piece is where the noise, I think that's where some policy folks can really help in that conversation. I think there's some things that we can help with reinforcing that position with these sort of concepts, because no one's really it's all out. It's been like stop embers, home hardening. The question we had with home hardening, we had this discussion the other day, was home hardening's fantastic, but home hardening is not a risk reduction thing till a point, right? It's a problem. I mean, let me say, home hardening assessments is getting to identify the problem, but then the people who have the property have got to make the changes, and then it becomes a risk reduction thing, right? So the question is, how many homes have to be hardened in an area? So you see all those red dots, those are less than 10 feet apart. So how many homes have to be hardened to where that changes the risk profile for Evercast? And so we're working with like the fire department saying, the SME, tell us, what does that number need to be? That creates the strategy end state, right? So if we need 50, 70, 80% of these homes, that then changes our risk profile, and you throw in then some land management with that. Now we're changing the way our community is exposed to conflagration. And now the fires are going to stay smaller, more manageable. The water system stays integrity. The fire department has time to respond, get mutual aid in, and we're able to make a good stand on these attacks. But right now, we're kind of living in this new thing where the beast is kind of ahead of us on this, which you call fire. And the three scenarios we have that we are working on with all our fire departments in the county here is a fire west of a town, whether it's Netherland or a community. That's the sort of traditional movie model. A lot of aircraft and people wearing, green and yellow outfits and doing a lot of great work, back burning. And then the fire's approaching town. Now you see fire engines in neighborhoods and hose lines and stuff stretched through the homes and defending it from coming in. And, you see the Type 6s and some aircraft still. And then the third scenario is it's broken through that. And that could be either like in a Marshall situation where it's just so large that it overwhelms suppression forces that you couldn't contain all the entry points into the built environment. So it finds its way in and now you got a conflagration, or you get multiple Evercasts dropping in and you don't have enough resources to hit all the spot fires. And then that starts it. So those are the scenarios. I think we know the problem well. We understand the problem. We've looked at our capabilities regionally, even here locally, and we're going to work on strategies and capabilities that help us kind of address these problems that we're seeing today and tomorrow.
Then, one of the issues that we have with the Marshall Fire was also the ditches.
Uh-huh.
That hadn't been cleaned out by the ditch company.
Okay.
How can we encourage the ditch companies to do that?
Well, I'm not the ditch guy, but I would say this: any fuel that you have becomes a source of, we call it receptive fuels and commuting, or the transfer fuels. I don't know if there's the question, I know we've sat in meetings around that, like, does ditch company have the right to do it? Do they have the responsibility to remove it? Does the homeowner have the ability to remove it? Can they remove it? These are the questions there. I think there's probably a middle ground in that, some space, but if it's on your property and you feel it's a risk, there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to take some mitigation to a point, right? So that's where I'm not the expert in the ditch piece. I'll defer to, we have a ditch person in the county that can be a resource for you and help you
That's
through
what I
it.
was gonna say, is that through Wildfire Partners, we now have a ditch person that is trying to coordinate some of that stuff, because that was such a big issue. I just wanted to do a time check because we have the state demographer at 6:50, and you were gonna talk about public safety, power shutoffs, and Sundance.
We'll wrap it up. Just tell me where to go,
We can
Commissioner.
stay with this, or we can move on.
We could probably talk about this for 3 more hours, so.
Probably could. Give me a call if you'd like to talk more. Happy to chat with you on anything that we have. Public safety power shutoffs, real quick. So, These are effective tools in being able to reduce our existing wildfire risk with current, infrastructure that we have. We are always in a public safety shut off, apparently, it looks like. I think the big thing here I wanted to tell everyone is that this is a high wind event and the public safety power shut off is the first impact. So even though we have a PSPS and you see the big, areas of concern, there's people that are gonna be without power that aren't in that because we're gonna get physical damage, trees are gonna fall down, you're gonna have lines separate, all these things are gonna happen. So the impact area will be greater than that. Things we've gone to work on in our office is really about, there's really kind of multiple phases. The first one is the notification that's made by Excel to us and say, hey, we maybe have a PSPS. This is when we start doing a lot of, basic coordination with policy group. Messaging starts flying out from Excel to their primary customers and also the folks that they have on their medical, vulnerability list. And so the community's starting to become aware, the media gets it, they start doing some press releases. Policy group doesn't want any messaging done around X, it's their problem to message, right? And then the preparedness side of this occurs, see Chris jump in here, because he's always part of the policy group, or Jan is, going, we'll do this now, Mike, and we'll go great. Is when you get to the point where weather service goes, it's now a warning or a watch or something around wind. And then we start picking up some preparedness, because we want to help the community be prepared for it, but we're only amplifying Excel's messaging around their PSPS state. So that starts submerging, we bring in their PIO to our JIC at the EOC, and start that relationship and help get the information out there. And then we move from that phase to we made a decision, and now it's that's the T point, the start time to when we actually get the flip, I know a better way to put it, but flick the switch, now we're out powered. And now that's all operational coordination. We're seeing, does anyone need to do anything? This is where we're starting to make people aware. They start shrinking down the area or the polygon, messaging's increasing, community's becoming more aware. And then we get into response. Now the wind starts, we start seeing impacts, manufactured homes start getting damaged, you start seeing power outages, generators start failing to add generators, high speed intersections don't go down, they go down. We got, deployment of generators. We're watching critical infrastructure. We're holding a lot of coordination meetings with all of you just to make sure your policy and executive groups are aware of what's happening, and everyone's kind of in their own space doing their thing, but we try to keep the coordination platform together. So we're all paying attention to what's happening across the county. And we get through that, hopefully without a fire, because at that point we could get a fire at any time. I mean, just because the power shut off doesn't mean we can't get a fire. And, there'll be cellular degradation. People will have, consumers will have a decreased experience with their cell phone, and there's some alert warning issues. And yeah, jump in, sorry.
I just have a really quick question. I think this may be like something that's contextual to where I am, but I struggle with when to open my emergency shelter in a PSPS situation. And we use it for charging, people use it for their batteries and those things. And then the last one, I think it was an issue that maybe there's some collaboration opportunities. But when there's a fire, it's a lot easier to know, hey, it's time to get that shelter rolling. And in the PSPS situation, it's a little bit different. And I'm just wondering if you think there's the opportunity for bigger collaboration on that, so we can, or if that's just something that is really contextual in that space.
It is from the community perspective. I think the first piece that the shelter starts opening under is that charging station. People don't have power or whatever, they come in for whatever services are there, sort of like a community resource center type piece is what's happening. And then the sheltering piece opens up because now people have their roof blown off and they can't stay in their house, and they don't, or it's so cold now that it's, a life-threatening hazard or problem from it. And that becomes then the things we're looking for at the EOC is that it's minus 10 degrees in Netherlands, it's a high wind event, and we got people that can't stay in their homes. And we need to open a shelter. And we're like, okay, can you open up the Ned Center? And we're like, great, what do you need support-wise? And that's where then I think the interface starts happening.
Okay.
But it's really like your call, your community, got to make this decision on it. And, and then just communicate what you're seeing for impacts is really where that lives. And we have these same conversations in the plains. It's like, okay, people don't have power. Are we going to move them to hotels? Like, well, is there emergency notification? Is there emergency housing issue here? Like, is their roof gone? Is there a reason why they can't be in their home for the next 12 hours or 4 hours, whatever this is going to be? So these are the things that I'm elevating into my policy group and going, what would you like to do, Chris? And give me permission and money. I can solve a lot of problems. So
as a surrounding community, Longmont has 73% of its power.
Yeah.
But I know the rest of you don't. And being a teacher here, I care about what happens here with all as my students and colleagues and whatnot. you know, is there any action on your part to insist that Excel undergrounds more of it? I don't know what the answer.
Yeah, we've been, I'm like, at least like the Louisville piece of it, like, and our city manager is in engagement regularly with Excel Energy, letting them know what our concerns are, what our needs are. Right now, it seems like for us, there, for a long time, there was an issue with a recloser that did get repaired, and it has helped in the more recent times. And that's not for the power shut off, it's for the emergency, the EPSS. So less incidents are happening, but it's more that it's the big feeders coming into the community that we need to have either reinforced or like made better versus the in-town undergrounding.
Okay. Good.
If that makes sense.
I just was wondering what the, what the focus was.
So that's ours. And I'll be honest, one of the, like Boulder County is, and the city of Boulder got some of the resources that came to Excel Energy. We were told by Excel, they're using it there. And one of the feeders that comes up to us might be, and it was a big might, but it might be one of the things that they start working on and spend some money on.
But it won't become to the city board.
Correct.
Come into.
Yeah.
When I was down testifying at the legislative hearing on the thing, I brought up, there was a NASA scientist there too, who started getting energy, he's an engineer. And so I kind of touched on that because I'm a C student, but I was like, hey, design to a standard, right? I understand mitigation, right? So we do this for 100-year floodplain, 5-year floodplain for bridges, roads. So our grid should be done, like, what is the design build standard for, mitigating against the hazard, the winds, the stuff we have? We do this with hurricane areas we do it with earthquakes, you design to a certain magnitude. And I think that's what's missing. And then, understanding the grid, then you get to the next layer of that, and it's like, it's been around forever, and how they build the design, it's been kind of hodgepodge together as communities grow. And so Excel says they're doing it. I think people are aware of it. I know the city's advocating heavily on, the county is just a matter of, is there the ability to leverage, and then are there resources to do it? And I think that's where the strategy is starting to emerge, but there's not a clear-cut answer of when. I think people want it now, but there's nothing clearly that's going to change that. Other than I think the short-term gains, can you harden what we have before the underground begin? Can that make it better against the wind events? And it's the really extreme ones that get us in the dirt, not just the 60-mile-an-hour one. And the EPSS stuff doesn't happen as much. So, which is emergency power safety shutoffs. That's the reclosers are taken out, and if it grounds out in circuits, it stops. They got to go re-inspect it. It's out of for 4 to 6 hours sometimes. So. But we're working on it, so we keep having meetings with Excel where let our city side and the resiliency team, they take more of the challenging and pressing them full court press model. I'm more of the, whoa, hey, let's work together and be operationally integrated. So when we do have an event, we're talking more, and we're getting more sharing of information. They've done really well taking our feedback and creating access to their grid. So we've done NDAs with them so we can see the grid better and see the outage. We can also better track when they're restoring them. We're even working to, do a lot more coordination with when they're turning the power back on, they turn something on, it starts a fire, and we still have 30-mile-an-hour winds. So we've done a better job in this last one, coordinating with the local fire, law enforcement to say, it's turning on here. Do you want to go in and do anything with evacs? Do you want to do anything with pre-positioning fire? And making sure that we're better positioned if we see anything happen when they re-energize. So that's the world. And then the last phase of this thing is community reaction and AR work. So there's always a community reaction. I think it's gotten less with each one. Yeah. The business community, though, is hugely impacted, and all the different things that are scheduled in the community gets people really wound up. And so the advanced notification, which we're trying to be better at, and the community's just getting more accustomed to it also. So the first one's always the hardest. And then the other one was the back-to-back. That was the new change that really made it hard and caught Excel flat-footed because they were messaging one way, then messaging this way, then messaging that way. And community's like, I just got told my power's coming on. Now I'm getting told it's going off. And that created some community consternation there, obviously. So that's why we do the ARs, and we keep working to be better.
I've seen around Boulder and even in my neighborhood in North Boulder, a whole lot of tree trimming trucks that are out that are trimming along the lines. Is that Excel?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Or is it the city? It's Excel.
No, it's Excel, and they started doing, they do that vegetation management on a rotation schedule. they tried to accelerate that and did not properly train their vegetation crews, so they had to stop and pause all of that work because they were just mangling trees.
Well, they were, yes.
Yeah,
And
they just come through.
so they have reset that, they've reset the training, and so they're starting that again just recently, which is great. So that will hopefully help
Okay,
for some of these wind events where it blows stuff into the power lines and trips them.
yeah. We have 2 minutes left.
Great.
Is something burning that anyone wants to say, ask?
Just real quick, so where is your position on cell service?
Sell low, buy high.
Thanks, Warren.
Don't follow that advice. That's bad advice. See if you're caught it.
Yeah. Cause we, like, right now in Louisville, you can't even send a text message in 90% of our city because cell service is so terrible.
Yeah.
And, we try to engage, we're trying to encourage cell companies to come in, add towers, do whatever. We're hearing a lot, and the concern is now it's a safety issue.
So the way that works is, if it's AT&T, we have FirstNet, and all first responders are on that. There's also priority. So for alerting, it's a different spec, or it's a different frequency range, it will go out. The problem is though, that if you have cell coverage that's either degraded or it's overloaded, and so many times they just get overloaded because everyone's on their phone right away. They go on, now it's repeating. Now we have a relationship that's going there and back, and it's data transfer. And if everyone gets on there, it gets slow, the latency is experienced, and now I can't get to the website or I can't get to the thing to see the map. But you got the wireless emergency alert. That will go out. And then priority, if I call up, I'm kicking people off the towers to make a phone call through. So that, but from a public perspective, yeah, so the density of that is something you have to negotiate with the cell providers, and they're gonna base it around business model and service area, and this is everything they're doing on their system for public safety is all done voluntarily. It's not a requirement of FCC or any law, so it's done by the goodness of their business will, and there's that balance, so.
But
which is more to
notices
do.
go even when cell coverage is low. So even if somebody has one bar, they're gonna get the notification.
They should,
to
yes.
evacuate or
They
whatever.
should, yes.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, well, Mike, thanks as always.
Great.
Very informative presentation, and you could tell he could go on for a long time. Not because he's verbose, but because
I'm
he's,
verbose.
no,
Finish up on me.
you've got a lot to share. No, not at all. No, but no, thank you very much, and lots of interesting and good stuff about how to sign up for alerts. Share this with your constituents, et cetera.
All this is on our website. You'll see we have translation. This is an example of it there. If I said 1 second left, and then the bag is just what we give out when we go there. So you have a straw, and we make investments. People love it because it's high quality stuff. They can actually use it in disaster, and it really helps motivate people to come and follow through on things. So any questions on this, let us know.
Okay, thanks, Mike.
You bet.
And we have also, so at our first meeting of this cycle, we had talked about all the changes in demographic projections in Colorado and in Boulder County that are affecting our housing needs, affecting our economy, affecting all kinds of future planning that we as elected officials and administrators need to be doing. And we have Neil Marquez with us from the Department of Local Affairs. He is online, and we can go ahead. Neil, do you have anything like a presentation that you want to share? Looks like he does. So yeah, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself, we've got you scheduled for like 20 minutes. So
Yep.
Floor is yours.
Can you hear me okay?
Thanks.
Can you hear me okay? Sorry, I missed that.
Oh, yes, we can.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah, and apologies. I was intending to be there in person, and then I got sick, and I am not there to avoid getting anyone else sick. But we're going to go over the population estimates and forecast Boulder's sort of demographic outlook. As you mentioned, my name is Neil Marquez. I am the state forecast demography here at the State Demography Office in the Department of Local Affairs. I'm still relatively new to this position, been here about a year, new compared to Cindy, who had been in this position for about 35 years. and recently retired. I was a state forecast demographer for the state of Oregon prior to this, and have been doing forecasting for population projections for about a decade now. So I have a good understanding of doing this, still relatively new to Colorado, but happy to share what we've been working on over the past year. So some high level, just like what we like to start with, just general what's happening within the state of Colorado. Key population trends, what we're seeing is lower fertility rates. That is, there's fewer births across the state happening year over year. Aging in the population means that there are more deaths happening year over year. The combination of those things means that we're seeing slower population growth, and we would expect to see slower population growth even if we had the same people moving in to the state overall, right? Just from this fact that we're having less births and more deaths, right? And historically, net migration has been a key population growth driver. Colorado is a state of migrants. Fun statistic for Colorado is that more than half of the people living in Colorado were born someplace else besides Colorado. Colorado is definitively a state of migrants, but we have seen some recent shifts in those trends, and I'll talk more about that moving forward. And then again, Colorado has been increasingly more diverse, and this is a pattern that we expect moving forward as well. So just some high-level Colorado trends. Historically, Colorado, and what I'm showing here is a graph year over year of the percent population growth comparing Colorado to the United States. Year over year, Colorado has grown not just faster than the United States as a whole, but much faster than the US as a whole. Even the times where Colorado has grown relatively slow in the early 2000s and things like that, Colorado was still growing faster than the US as a whole. That really started to shift in the pandemic period, 2021, 2022. Part of this is a combination of factors. The US started growing faster than what we had seen historically, and Colorado started growing slower than what we had seen historically. And again, I'll get into some of the reasons for that. But when we're breaking down how populations change over time, the way that we like to break it down is into these two components. Populations can only change in a couple of ways, either from births adding to the population, deaths subtracting from the population, and we call that difference between births and deaths natural change. And the other way is via net migration. Net migration is the combination of people who move into a place versus the number of people who leave out of a place. More people coming in than leaving, you have positive net migration. More people leaving than coming in, you have negative net migration. And as you can see, as I mentioned before, when I mentioned that Colorado is a place of migrants, we really see strong growth being contributed by this net migration, many more people entering the state than leaving, and consistent but lower natural change contributing to population growth over time. However, beginning in about 2007, natural change really started to take a decline, right? And that lines up with more deaths, less births happening across the state. And at the same time, net migration also started to fall off, although we started seeing some rebounds. And the last year of data that we have, we're able to provide estimates that are based on concrete data, or 2024. Everything after 2024 for the purposes of this presentation is a projection. And that just means that we don't have sufficient amount of data to call it an estimate. We have to make assumptions. We don't have that requisite data. It is therefore a forecast. Something that you can see is that in 2025, we're actually forecasting for net migration to fall off pretty dramatically, less than half of what we saw before. And again, I will get into some of the reasons for that. But getting back at that natural change, looking at births and deaths, births have been on the decline since about 2007, some rebounding in 2015, but then again falling off. We think this will pick up a little bit in the coming years. This is mostly due to the fact that we've seen fertility rates themselves start to stabilize, which even if fertility rates aren't increasing, if you have a growing population and the population who's most likely to have kids, you'll see that births tick up even with the stabilization of fertility rates. Deaths, on the other hand, peaked in the pandemic and are starting to come down, but we expect this trend to continue. COVID really just exacerbated this trend that we had already seen before of deaths increasing over time. And we're projecting currently that deaths are looking to surpass births by 2048. The Congressional Budgeting Office, who makes forecasts for the United States, is expecting this to happen in 2031, just for the whole of the US, just to give you a comparison. And where I was coming from, the state of Oregon has already seen more deaths than births since about 2020. So states vary widely on this. Colorado is definitely on the further end. Nevertheless, we think this is something that's coming. We know this is something that's coming in the near future. When deaths surpass births, the only way that a population can grow is when net migration is positive and outweighs that negative natural change. But I'm here to talk about Boulder. I'm giving Colorado mostly to talk as a baseline and have that comparison. Colorado has some different trends. Population growth has been slower than what we've seen in the past. Since about 2015. Boulder hasn't really grown in its population. We're at a stagnant point in population growth. In our forecast, we expect that to pick up again in the near term before again stabilizing in the long term. And this is a pretty different trajectory than the population growth that we're expecting for Colorado as a whole, which, if you remember from that graph that I showed you before, we're expecting, continued positive growth for the state of Colorado. So what's driving this, right? And one thing that I want to say is that we have made some pretty big revisions between last year and this year, revising down most of our forecasts. However, Boulder is one where we didn't really make a ton of revisions. It was at this slow and then stabilizing population growth before. This is something that we have continued moving forward. So this isn't a big impact that, between this year and last year, when we made changes to all these population projections, that Boulder saw some big change. This is something that we've been forecasting for some time. And again, the comparison between Boulder and Colorado, historically, Boulder has grown a bit slower than the rest of Colorado as a whole, and this is something that we expect moving forward as well. But again, getting into those impacts of like, where is population growth coming from, comparing it to this natural change versus net migration, two things pop up here. Similar to Colorado as a whole, Boulder has been highly dependent on net migration, more people coming into the county than leaving the county to make up or to make its population growth. It's been a disproportionately high factor leading into population growth within the county. But in addition, natural change has less of a positive impact in the county than it does for Colorado as a whole. So what does that mean? It means that that difference between births and deaths is a lot smaller for Boulder than it is for Colorado, right? And there's still more births than deaths. We haven't seen a year where there was more deaths than births for Boulder. But as you can see, as we're getting closer and closer to 2024, this dotted line here, that difference is very, very small. And by 2027, actually, we're forecasting that Boulder will have more deaths than births. And again, what does that mean? That means that if the county is expected to continue to grow, it's only because there's more people entering the county than leaving the county. Part of the reason of this is that fertility rates are quite low within Boulder County. Currently, Colorado is sitting at about 1.46 kids per woman as the total fertility rate. The average number of the total fertility rate being the average number of kids a woman is expected to have over the course of her lifetime. Whereas Boulder is sitting at about 1.16. And to give in some even more contextualizing for that, no state or the District of Columbia, the lowest fertility rate for any of those is 1.2. So Boulder is even lower than across anything that we see across the United States. There's, of course, some counties that are even lower than this, but just looking at the states in DC, it is an outlier in terms of that as well. So pretty low on this. That being said, this is pretty common for locations that have large college towns. There's a lot of people who are here specifically to go for higher education purposes. People who are in the city or in the county rather for higher education purposes are most likely delaying having kids until they're a bit older. And by that time, probably not still within Boulder, which I'll show in a graph moving forward. So getting in, knowing that the fertility rates are low, and I will say that life expectancy is really high within Boulder. But even though life expectancy is very high because of the aging population that we have, we still have that high number of deaths, hence that small difference between births and deaths. But let's look at net migration, who's coming into the county, who is leaving. When we break this down by age, I'm comparing this in blue to Colorado. When you look at Boulder County, and this is a rate, so that's why you see it much higher for Boulder County, more pronounced. You see a huge influx of individuals in that 15 to 19 and 20 to 24. They're coming mostly for college related reasons, right? This is a big driving factor, maybe some post graduation as well. But this is a huge influx in terms of population growth into the county. At the same time, you see an out migration from groups 25 to 29. This is immediately following graduation. A lot of individuals who come and get educated within Boulder County then leave. At the same time, you also see increases again, pretty average to what we're seeing, but nonetheless increases in that 35 to about 50 range. This is a migration that tends to happen not necessarily within the city of Boulder, but these are mostly Longmonts, more Eries recently, people like settling in, sometimes with their kids, which is why you see positive migration here. So there's also almost this bimodal distribution depending on the city that we're talking about in terms of migration. At the same time, when we look historically at net migration, we break this down by both domestic in blue and international in yellow. Most of the swings are coming from domestic migration, and international migration has been pretty steady. Again, the international is mostly coming from domestic being coming from other states or other counties, international coming from out of the country. International is again mostly driven by the school age population. But you see this big uptick happening in 2022, 2023, and 4 as well. And this is a statewide phenomenon. Actually, it's a US-wide phenomenon where we saw a large increase, specifically in asylum-seeking migrants coming into the United States, which, as you probably read from the news, Colorado received a significant disproportionate portion of, and that also was true for Boulder County as well here. So contributing to that, that also being said, we know that this is unlikely to persist moving forward. That international migration beginning in mid 2024, but especially with this new administration in 2025, has seen some pretty significant falling off. And it's estimated by several research institutes, including the Brookings Institute, that actually more people left the United States than came in. So it is in 2025. So it is unlikely that this international migration, this yellow, is going to persist. And at the same time, we've seen negative domestic migration, people leaving Boulder County for other counties pretty much every year since the pandemic started, beginning in 2021, but also in 2, 3, and 4 as well. The impacts that this has in terms of age distribution for everything that I'm talking about, we're not just looking at numbers, but we're also looking at who makes up the county. You see a pretty unique age profile, and here I'm showing age on the x-axis and counts on the y-axis for several different counties. This is the age distribution as of 2024. For both Boulder and this comparison county Larimer, you can see the strong impact that the school age population is having on the age distribution. We know that that's going to continue to be there in the future. We treat them as a special population in terms of when we make population and forecasts, that we know Boulder in the future is probably going to have a significant share of school age individuals because of the university draw. At the same time, when you look at the rest of the age distribution, you can see it's pretty flat up until about like the 70s when population grows, starts to fall off. That's similar to Larimer, although you see more falling off beginning earlier as we get into the Gen X and the baby boomer population. But that's very different from like a Weld or Broomfield, where it's younger millennial parents with their kids living in those areas. And this is a testament to the aging population within Boulder as well. This is all speaking to that the population in Boulder outside of that school age population is quite a bit older. And we know that this is going to continue to happen moving forward as well. And why is aging such an important dynamic? Well, we know that it's so related to so many different social dynamics, social fabric, social processes. When you look at spending within the United States, retirement age populations tend to spend quite a bit less. It peaks at about 45 to 54. But then when you hit retirement age starts to fall off, or this is income rather, start to fall off. but spending sees a similar pattern in terms of peaking at 45 to 54, but then spending at 65 to 54. Income tax also increases 45 to 54, but then starts to fall off 65, 75 plus. At the same time, we also know that social services also increase quite substantially when you get to 65, 75 plus and really start to peak at 80 plus as well. So as the population continues to age, we know that aging will impact our labor markets, our tax base, shift consumer spending, but also impact the social services and the cost of social services overall, while you have a potentially shrinking working age population within the county. And this is something that's not unique to Boulder. This is happening across the whole of Colorado. In fact, in the 90s, we use a statistic called the worker versus retiree dependency ratio. In the 90s, for every 5 working people, you had about 1 retired person, or 65 traditional retired age population, 65 plus compared to 25 to 54. But by 2024, it's about 2.2 and a working age person to retired age, traditional retired age population. And we know this is going to continue to decline in the future. Granted, we know that people are continuing to work into later ages. That being said, we know that retirements are going to happen in the, if not at 65, within the 70, 75 plus as retirements really start to pick up. So when we break down our population projections by different age groups, we can start to get an idea of where we're expecting this growth to happen. When we look at the population who's most likely to work, 25 to 54, so this is right outside of the college population, traditional college age population. We've seen that been on the decline in Boulder, way down from the peaks in the early 2000s, but then it started to rebound, decline again. We're expecting a rebound to come to happen in the next decade or so, or next few years or so. This is largely predicated on the fact that we know that job growth across the state, but including Boulder and the surrounding counties where people work and reside in Boulder, has been slow year over year. You've probably seen the headlines that it's estimated that we had 0 job growth in 2025 across the whole of the US, and Colorado has shared a similar fate. And we expect that to continue over the next couple of years. But as jobs increase, retirements start to happen, we expect positive migration to continue, especially in this working age population moving forward. But when we look at the retirement age population, a completely different story here, right? We've seen persistent growth in this population really starting to pick up in about the 2005, 2007 period, getting to 2024, our last estimate year, and we expect this strong growth to continue for a considerable amount of time. This is largely due to people aging in place. As I mentioned before, Boulder has a pretty substantial population, 45 to 65, who is expected to age into that 65 plus in the coming years. At the same time, we also have people moving in who are part of those not quite 65, but even 55 to 64, who are going to age as well. So newer people may be looking to retire in the future into Boulder, using some of their equity to buy a place within Boulder, moving in, contributing to that growth in the 65 plus population, right? And then again, changing the angle here that we're looking at this for 5 to 17, the traditional school age population. So not that post-secondary, but primary and secondary school. This has been on the decline since about 2012 within Boulder, and we're expecting these declines to continue for the next 5, 10, 15 years before it starts to rebound again. And these rebounds are coming mostly because that working age population is going to pick up because of that job growth. We're expecting some of them to stay in Boulder, and then in the long term, they're contributing to some of the rebounds and the kids that we're expecting. So you can see that dynamic. Jobs bring people in, some people stay, have families here in lives, and then you can see some of that kids starting to rebound. But even this rebound is much lower than the population that we had seen in the years prior.
Population now.
Sorry, was there a question? Okay. Just getting in, we know that there is a lot of variation even within Boulder. Boulder is a very large county, and we have seen very different trajectories in population growth looking at different cities within Boulder. And I don't have time to get into each of these dynamics, but looking at Boulder, which hasn't really grown too much since about 2015, it's been relatively flat. Compare that to Longmont, which has had very strong growth going back to 2000 up until about the pandemic period where it started to stabilize and lose some population. Unincorporated started to decline a bit, and here you can see some of the impacts between here and Louisville from the Marshall fires. And then you have like a place like Erie that even in the 2020 post 2020 period, you even see it start to pick up in growth. So we know that there is a lot of different dynamics here contributing to population growth over the time, and as well as the age structure and the future trajectories for each of them that I don't have time to get into, right? So looking forward, the things that we think about when we're thinking about population growth, not just for Boulder, but for many different locations is on this slide. We're thinking more so about housing affordability more than what we've ever thought in the past. As a research organization, in the 2010s, Colorado was very middle of the pack in terms of housing affordability, but now is a very much certified outlier in terms of housing affordability. And we're seeing housing affordability act as a limiting factor in terms of stagnating population growth. At the same time, we're also seeing stiffer competition for labor, both in that the working age population is not growing as fast as it had in the past. So it just means that there's less people to compete for in terms of attracting them for jobs, but also for the jobs that historically have been the linchpins of the workforce for Colorado, and Boulder included, these professional and technical services jobs. We've seen other portions of the state really start to pick up in that job growth as well, especially within the South. Think about the Research Triangles and the Carolinas as well, really starting to pick up in that sector. Again, acting as competition for this labor that Colorado has historically been very strong in. At the same time, we know natural disasters are also impacting where people are interested in living. I already talked to you about immigration policy, and geopolitical events are impacting our forecast, and we think that's impacting what we expect for international migration moving forward. But there's a few other things in here that we're thinking about that I'm just going to cut short for the sake of time because I'm a bit over at this point anyway, and I want to leave a little bit of time for questions. But I just wanted to say really quickly, if you have questions about your city or perhaps about something that we don't address here, we're always open to answering questions, even outside of the presentation space. You can either reach out directly to myself or go to our website, which we have a form which you can ask questions to directly, and we can put you in contact with the correct person who would be best suited for answering your questions. And again, thank you for your time today, and happy to answer some questions now.
Thank you very much. That was really interesting. We have a question?
It's not a question. I had the pleasure of hearing my predecessor at the Weld County all cities meeting that they had. And it was dramatically interesting about the foreign immigrant coming in, saying that if they didn't, and this is how I interpret it, if they didn't stop some of the policies that were being presented there, it would damage that county, to a point where they couldn't recover. If they continued to try to grab people off the street and other things like that, and harm folks that were here legitimately working for some farm industry, it was going to absolutely devastate their farming communities. And it was kind of interesting to see, because here in Boulder County, we have a different sort of immigrant population that's coming here to do jobs that we don't have the people that have the skill set to do that, like scientific aspects and things like that.
Right.
And so that was interesting to hear, because that's not, and the guys in the room were like going, when they first heard Representative Evans, he was touting the line, but then the demographer was so sweet and said in the nicest way, you can't continue to do that. And because it was going to harm them, because they were such their economic driver was agriculture.
Well, and the meat packing.
Yeah, and we know that there has been very targeted efforts to attract immigrant populations within Weld County, within the meatpacking plants there, and populations that I think you traditionally don't think about. There's like we saw large increases in Haitian immigrant populations within Weld County. I think people have been thinking Venezuelan, Central American for most of it, but yeah, each county has like a different dynamic, and how you had mentioned. Boulder is no stranger to international migrants, but it's a very different type of migrant working in a very different type of sector under different circumstances historically. Although even Boulder saw some influx at the county, we don't know exactly like where within the cities or whether they've stayed, but we did see some influx of what the Bureau was defining as like asylum seeking migrants, which would have been a different population even then than those than like H-1B visa migrants or anything like that. So, but yeah, totally heard.
A couple more minutes for questions. For Neil. So, well, I saw a pretty extended presentation by the state demographer that also looked at where the student population coming, I think it was, can't remember if it was just Boulder County, if it was Colorado, was coming from to go to college, and college age students likewise leaving Colorado or Boulder County. And that was kind of interesting as well, because it looked like we weren't really as strongly attracting out-of-state students the way we used to do I don't know when, but what the comparison time was.
Yeah, and there was definitely a shift in beginning, it started in 2019, but really got exacerbated like everything else with COVID, where we started to see that shift overall. And it's hard to parse out whether that also tied in with the fact that we started to see more that net migration number within Colorado also start to come down. So is it like related? Is this like an independent factor with students as well? They're contributing to that, but most people who come into the state of Colorado are when they're migrating from other states, like who we get is that young 24 to 34 age population. It's right out of college. And it has historically been tied to the, again, those professional technical service jobs as well. So the fact that you're like alluding to that at the same time, we're also seeing this college age population drop. I wonder if the competition in other states is also such that it's attracting other people in the same way that we're losing potentially the PST jobs. And I mentioned the Carolinas because this is where I came from before. I was actually at the Research Triangle area over there. And even in the short time that I was there between 2019 and 2024, just saw huge growth in those industries, and tons of people come, and cost of living just like shoot up within those areas, and nowhere near as much as Colorado in terms of cost of living. And the jobs certainly aren't offering as much money. But even when you have a little bit less pay, when you're comparing housing costs, and this is anecdotal, I'm using my own situation, but I had a 4-bedroom, 2-bath for $250,000, and now I'm living in Denver, and that's like unthinkable. That's just how to make an adjustment there. But when I was asking how much people were making in the kind of sectors that we were working in, it was like, yeah, it's lower, but like it's not 2-3 times lower in the same way that the housing costs are. So it could be that, and you're also seeing those universities that are around there starting to cater to providing for those industries as well. So I wonder if there is a connection there, in addition to losing people in the jobs, maybe also stiffer competition rather, with the universities as well.
Yeah. Any other questions, comments? I don't see anyone online. I'll just, I find this fascinating, so I've got one. But I mean, well, the two things that really jump out, maybe three, but two primarily, we all looked at each other with the school age population thing. And that's going to play out in the next couple of years is we have to close schools, both in St. Vrain and Boulder Valley. And then the other is the kind of housing that we're building. And, you know, Boulder, city of Boulder, building lots and lots of apartments, small apartments. But I don't know, you know, that population is not really growing. So, what we need is the aging in place so that people can downsize and get out of where they are to open up housing. I'm not gonna move out of my house, it's way too big.
But you have to have
You need a place
something with
to
that
move
though.
too.
You
Yeah.
can't, it's not only that, but you don't solve the problem if it gets bought up by a group of venture capitalists trying to, you know, do some sort of thing like that.
Yeah.
You know, a bunch of private homes, we've got to be able to make it where it's,
Right.
you know, owner
Private
occupied.
sale. Yeah, yeah, what I
Hey
don't
there.
know, the question that comes up for me is if we were more successful at building moderately priced housing for families, would we have more families? Or are we building for the population we have? I'm sorry, Taisha, you were trying to get in.
No,
Oh,
yeah, I
it's no
think that,
problem. I was just sharing, as you know, the city of Boulder has been this in a staged process trying to determine whether or not we're going to open area 3 for additional housing. And one of the questions is, by the good majority of my fellow councilmates, although I do not agree, because they're interested in having a housing type around having more duplexes and cottages and things that are moving away from that 1 bedroom apartment. I will say though, there is pretty strong evidence that we have enough of footprint in area 1 to be able to build that. The concern again is even if we did open up that area, the cost of infrastructure would make it so that that is not going to be middle income or that is still going to be high end when the developer is going to be responsible for having to do some of the utility infrastructure. So definitely hear you all on that. And I think the biggest question I have, I'm very curious about the outcomes of the listening sessions that BBSD is doing in their, over the next couple of months. And of course the aging populations as well, and just kind of thinking differently about multi-generational housing opportunities, maybe I've noticed even in other countries, student housing and nursing and senior living housing are starting to be interconnected in ways that previously weren't even considered. So, going back to kind of that loneliness epidemic as well. But definitely appreciate this conversation and always timely.
Yeah, thanks. Well, we did eat into and thank you again, Neil, especially not feeling well for the presentation. It was very interesting. And if you could share the slides with us.
you should already have them.
Yeah, Nick has them. He'll share them with everyone else. I think it'd be good food for future conversations. So we have really eaten up the time that I am trying to save for for conversation and updates among all of us. And we could stay an extra 5 minutes, although I don't want to keep our sheriff's deputy any longer than we have to, but maybe just a quick, like anything new in each of your communities that you really want to share. And since online's been kind of quiet, maybe I'd start there. You're very welcome, Neil. Anil, Scott, Taisha, Ken, anything quick to share? Paloma, I'm sorry, you were covered up by something on my screen.
I'll go.
Okay, thanks.
So in Niwot, we have a fun event this month called, geez, I can't believe it's April. Around the World celebration in Niwot. And so essentially restaurants and retail outlets and businesses kind of open up their doors and have a specifically themed international food, drink, and travel experience. at different locations. So the community comes out and goes and visits with businesses and experiences food from different parts of the world. And it's one of my favorite events. So that event is April 25th, 2026, coming up at the end of this month.
Thanks, Scott. I thought the name of your event was, geez, I can't believe it's April. I wish it would be a great name for an event.
I'll go next briefly. You may know we have the Boulder International Film Festival that starts on Thursday, and then there's the Conference on World Affairs for CU Boulder, which I think is the following week. So lots going on, and of course we have Earth Day. There's a comedy, climate comedy event coming on April 21st, and so I'm happy to share some of those. The council is going to be talking about our facilities investment strategy coming up this Thursday. And Chris, I can't remember if we had a couple of things that we want to make sure the group knew about.
Yeah, the other one was, we're also talking about our arts blueprint tomorrow night, which is super, I think, interesting. And then the last one was just, we're coming to the finish line on the update to the Boulder Valley Comprehensive Plan, which is joint between the city and the county. So that's coming this summer.
And when is the conversation about the tip wage?
TBD on when it's coming back.
Okay.
Probably July-ish.
Oh, okay.
And then I would just add one other thing, just making sure this group was aware that the Food Security Network of Boulder and Broomfield released their action plan, food action plan, in January. They had an open house at Growing Gardens last month, and are just doing absolutely incredible work. And I think it's just a great way to cross-pollinate, pun intended, across our community. So I want to make sure that you all are aware of that. There are some county-specific and city-specific policy recommendations that we're starting to go through. And again, given the state of our world, state of our country, state of our state, I just, that food security and sovereignty and infrastructure and access and skills are just really central in my mind right now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Taisha. Anybody in the room?
Yeah. City of Louisville just finished their comprehensive plan.
You did? Yep.
Finally.
I hope that a lot of our developers get some of this demographic information because
Yes.
I'm thinking now, like, dense and tall, not the smartest.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And May 2nd, we're going to be doing a joint Earth Day celebration with Lafayette at the Lafayette Recreation Center on Baseline. And then the night will be our first farmer's market from 9 to 1 downtown. That's good.
Sean, anything?
Well, we have our typical Cinco de Mayo festival in May at the Roosevelt Park, so that should be exciting as usual. Huge event there, and so I encourage people to come out. Looking at the calendar there, it looks like it'll be probably before. Yeah,
It's on the second.
on the second there. So.
I'm excited to go to that, so.
Yeah, so anyhow, that's,
Excited.
oh, no, it's great. I see people from Lafayette and all over, at this event and everything, so it's great. We're dealing with, some airport issues, here, so we'll be, keeping you all up to speed on things, so I know you were looking at that and so.
Come on over to the club.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're, yeah.
Yes,
So-
we are. It's worse for them though.
Yeah, yeah, they got it.
Well, yeah, it's not just the noise, it's also just the fact that it's just not paying its way.
Oh.
And so, you know, we've been supplementing it as a community, so that we are, you know, in compliance with the grants and everything to the tune of about $100,000 a year. And, you know, at least a decade, and it's getting old and unacceptable. And to the point where I made a motion to, dissolve the airport advisory board because we continue to get, responses from the airport advisory board that was, the data was presented to us, from people, which was more conjecture, and it was mainly from the the advocacy groups that are out there for the pilots.
Oh,
And the nasty grams that I've been receiving for literally months is just ridiculous because we've talked about that. It's at a point where it's got to pay its way. And hangar, not that these two things are related, but hangar costs should be at least somehow equitable in society to those that live in mobile homes, who our hangar costs are somewhere around $1,500 a year, and a mobile home land lease is around $500 to $1,000 a month. And that is unequitable, it's unethical.
yeah.
And so how that is, and as far as landing fees, that's just one way of paying for it all. We're not suggesting what we do with our golf courses with dynamic pricing or anything like that. So we're getting a ton of pushback on that. And that's not even talking about noise
Yeah.
and fuel.
Yeah, let's keep moving. Jen?
Yeah, so our arts committee is doing what they call the BFF, it's Superior Boulder Film Friends, is kind of a kickoff to Sundance. So every month there's a independent film that they're gonna be showing at our new civic space. And you can see that on the website, but it's booked out through June. And it's been really fun to just kind of teach people like how to come, how to watch the film, how to talk with, and usually the person who made the film is there as well. So it's kind of just teeing people up for Sundance in a like the healthy relationship way with the directors and the industry. So it's fun.
We've been busy. We had another fire in our downtown last night, which was almost really bad, but it ended up being okay. Our guys got out there really quick. We also had an election yesterday, and our mayor and pro tem are one vote apart right now. And so that's been an interesting situation today, which is fine though. We're working through it. And then I think the biggest thing is Caribou Village is finally moving forward. We finally got through CDPHE, which has taken forever. So they started working on it yesterday, which is awesome because that needs to happen.
Any update on Eldora purchase?
Oh, yeah, that too. I think we're probably likely to be done at the end of April. And so we're kind of working towards that deadline, but it depends on the market and bonds and interest rates and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, and Taisha did Boulder go, and I could think the only thing I'll take any time on is that just today, we decided, or gave direction to go ahead and continue the lawsuit that we're in with Superior, and I think City of Boulder is part of that too, against the Rocky Mountain Metropolitan Airport over their noise and lead fuel pollution. The Supreme Court upheld the dismissal of the lawsuit. The Court of Appeals upheld dismissal. We're gonna take that up to the Supreme Court of Colorado, and we'll see. I'm not optimistic. I think we are right. I think our position is the right position legally, but I'm not real optimistic about it. Otherwise, we're gonna, county commissioners tomorrow will be holding a meeting about the Boulder Valley Comp Plan, providing input to Hannah Hipley, our long range planner. We did get, and Neil's still on, we did get a grant, not as much as we asked for, but we got a grant for some planning and engineering and design work on the Boulder to Erie Trail. I think it was about 650,000. We had asked for 2.5 million, but it'll get us started. So that's good. That project keeps moving. I think that's about it. So sorry we went over. That just is a sign that we have a lot of really good stuff to hear. And
have you heard anything about the fire this morning? But what the cause was?
Ask that man.
I have not heard the cause yet.
No?
Still under investigation.
Yeah.
Anything, well, there was also the fire near Chautauqua, we never heard anything about.
Oh, yeah. Watch the wakes me up at 39.
I've not heard on that one either. All the investigations are still out, as far as I know.
Yeah. Great, well, so our next meeting is June 10th And we've got the list of topics that folks wanted, to talk about. I don't know what our next topic is. It's a
You don't know, Nick?
closely guarded secret.
It's everybody, I mean, we're here.
We're willing to do transportation for the invitation.
Anybody from Lafayette,
Yeah.
here we are in
Lafayette.
Lafayette, we don't see anybody from Lafayette.
No, oh, well, yeah, we got a note just right before the meeting from David Friedland that he wasn't gonna be able to make it, he had a conflict, yeah. So, all right, well, thank you, thanks to those of you online, thanks for so come join us next.
Take an extra bag if you want, take it home, give it to a neighbor.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
bags, I took a piece,
Yeah.
bags,
That lights
Stay-
strong.
like a backup